Although I grew up on comic books my entire childhood up until maybe I was about 15, 16 when I got into sports and girls, I was really into comics. And it's funny that once I stopped collecting comics, I didn't care about anything comics related. So while it would be a wet dream for the MCU to have been around when I was a kid,
Hmm.
as an adult, I'm not that into these movies, and I wasn't a huge fan of this when it first came out. I did like it a lot better on this rewatching. But again, this isn't necessarily my peak genre. What about you in relation to superhero movies?
I'm exactly the same. When I grew up, we didn't have all these movies, and I did not read the comic books. I knew very little about this. I grew up with Superman, the Christopher Reeve movies. The Batman came when I was in my late teens. They're okay. I was never, and I'm all this Marvel stuff. I'm not a huge fan of. I've seen a few, the ones that are quote unquote good. I'll go see those if they got good reviews. But I am not one who sees any stuff like this. Now, Black Panther, I heard was fantastic, so we went to the theater to see it. And I got to say, I'm going to mirror you almost completely on this one. I liked it when I saw it in the theater, but I didn't love it. But when I rewatched it today, I really, really enjoyed it. I hadn't seen it since the theater, and I added this to my list of movies to review every couple of years or rewatch every couple of years. I really, really enjoyed it today.
So it starts off with a Conan the Barbarian, Lord of the Rings type opening where you get the narration and you get the fantasy elements kind of explained to you, a little bit of context of the world we're entering in, where they explain vibranium, Wakanda, and how Black Panther gets his powers and stuff like that. I thought that was a pretty good introduction because, like those movies, they get a lot of stuff out the way off the bat where you don't really have to think too much about what's going on. And you get a lot of the sillier stuff out of the way off the bat, and you can get into that heart of the movie. And from there, it gets very grounded very quickly because we enter what looks like project building, and we get young T'Challa confronting N'Jabu, and they talk about the fact that N'Jabu's a spy, and he let Ulysses claw into Wakanda, I guess for money, and Ulysses stole a quarter ton of vibranium. A quarter ton sounds like a lot, but anyway, he escaped with it and killed a bunch of people on the way out. The way they make these Wakandas out to be and how powerful they are, it seems kind of implausible that Ulysses Claw, at least a version of Ulysses Claw we see in this movie, could pull that off. But for the sake of not harping on that, he does that, and we get established real quick with the original, or the at least the Black Panther before T'Chaka, the one before the one we follow in the movie. And it kind of establishes a few things right away. We don't know where it's going to go with these characters, but these characters kind of play a pivotal part in what's going on. But from there, we jump towards modern time and we see T'Challa, his son, and we get a little exposition about what happened in Civil War, where his father got killed.
Again, I thought it was a nice setup to what's about to come. Um, it does surprise me a little bit that there was uh, bad guys. I think of this movie as Wakanda being this nice, peaceful, loving place, but there's bad guys within the royal family, which I didn't obviously at the very beginning. Didn't understand that. I get it now, but I'm just surprised to see that. To be honest
Mhm.
with you.
Yeah. From there, we see Black Panther in action. Typical Marvel scene where like guys are shooting guns at the hero and he's ignoring them. Someone's attacking him from behind and he beats them without even barely looking back. Just a few things didn't quite make a lot of sense in this scene. He rescues some refugees, including his girlfriend, Nakia, but she's acting like she didn't really need rescuing. I guess she's like a spy in the movie, so maybe she was on a mission and he kind of rescued her. But then as they're leaving, the Walking Dead chick, she kind of tells them, forget what you see or what you saw, which kind of doesn't add up to how T'Challa was acting because he let them see his face. It's like if you have the mask, You don't want people to know who you are, what's going on. Like, why let your face show in that scene if after you leave they're like, forget what you saw, you know? And he's their king, so how can they forget the fact that their king is running around in a cat suit killing people?
Yeah, so okay, I was gonna say a little off topic. You mentioned the Walking Dead chick because I was looking at that movie and I'm like, that's Michonne from The Walking Dead. I used to watch religiously, but then I looked at the IMDb and I was like, well, that's not her. But I'm looking at now, I had the wrong character. So yeah, you are 100% right.
Yeah, yeah.
Walking Dead chick.
Yeah, I read some of the Walking Dead comics. I'm pretty familiar with the show. I'm not a fan of the show, but I read the comics and gave the show a shot. It's not for me though, so I'm very familiar with her character. Yeah, and from there, we get a quick scene of establishing his family and his annoying sister, his mother, things like that, and then we see Killmonger in a great scene. He's talking about British colonists and kind of the past. I guess some people are familiar with it, some maybe not. But British colonists kind of took over a lot of parts of Africa because once they find out there's a lot of natural resources there, like gold and different things like that, they kind of exploited that. I don't have a ton of African friends, but the ones I do, they definitely talk about the racism that still goes on there. So I thought this was kind of like a poignant scene with our main bad guy Killmonger, the way he talks to the woman in the museum. A lot of the stuff he says makes sense, and I think that's why people like his character so much, because with a lot of movies like this, you have the bad guy who's just trying to take over the world, generic bad guy in these type of movies, and there's a little bit more to his character.
These items aren't for sale.
How do you think your ancestors got these? You think they paid a fair price? Or did they take it like they took everything else?
Right. I was going to say the same thing. Obviously, we know he's the bad guy in this movie, but like when he's talking in the museum, clearly he's educated and he seems to have a moral compass, but he's going to do some bad things to get there. That's kind of the way I was thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah. So we see him and Claude do a bunch of bloodless killings, which reminds you, oh yeah, this is a kids movie because they're shooting people left and right. We don't see a drop of blood. They steal a vibranium weapon, which at this point in the movie doesn't make sense because we literally just heard a few minutes ago he stole a quarter ton of vibranium. Like, why are you stealing this? But it's just to set up something that comes around later on. But yeah, then from there we get a cool scene of the waterfall being drained out by these like mechanical things, and then we see T'Challa being drained of his powers, and I guess maybe yearly or however often they do this, people from the different tribes there can challenge him to be king. And when I'm watching this, I'm like, this is kind of really, really stupid way of choosing your king. It's like, who's the strongest? So it's like, we don't have like Brock Lesnar or Mike Tyson or people like that getting the chance to be president. But then again, I think about who we have as president. So it's like, as sophisticated as we are, it's like we don't do much better than they are. So maybe that's
no.
pick our president.
I would take this at this point in our world. Hey, I would take this sort of challenge any day. But no, I thought it was interesting. It's that it seemed very old school. For Wakanda supposed to be this very advanced civilization, yet they're doing this barbaric thing from centuries earlier. It was an interesting contrast, I thought.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of religion. I'm not a religious person at all. I'm an atheist, but
Yeah, I mean,
you do have a lot of religious people that follow these odd traditions that they don't really add up with the modern culture that we're in, but they just follow it because it's the way it's always been. So, but yeah, I don't follow any of that stuff. So he beats M'Baku with some kind of UFC submission hold, which I thought was interesting because it's like a modern take instead of just like using the typical kung fu stuff or whatever they do in these type of movies. He gets hurt, but then he gets healed, and we get some as he's getting healed with the flower and he's getting his powers back. I guess he enters the spirit world, and we see some flashbacks of the Civil War stuff where his father gets killed. For those who didn't see that movie, they show it to you. And we hear his father tell him that,
"You're a good man with a good heart, and it's hard for a good man to be king.
It was just kind of interesting because, again, that does play into what we find out later. But it's kind of true words, though, because being king, being ruler, there's a lot of politics that comes with that, and you can't really make it on top without compromise. And I'm not a big book reader. As I just mentioned before, I read a lot of comic books as a kid, not a lot of novels, but I did read the Game of Thrones books. I bypassed the Lord of the Rings because I was reading comics as a kid and not, novels like Lord of the Rings. But George R. R. Martin, who wrote those books, talked about Lord of the Rings being a big influence for him, but he was saying that he would read these stories where it's like Aragon became king and he was a good man and became a good ruler. And he's like, well, what about his tax policies? And what about this? And what about that? And it's like, it's not just that, it's never that simple. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, you're right there also, because when there's power, there's always going to be politics. And no matter, as we know in the world we live in today, there's always going to be some sort of divide. You could be the greatest at this, and this, but there's going to be people who disagree with you about this, and this. So you can't please everybody.
Yeah. From there, we get a little bit of more character development, and there's a lot of talk about possibly sharing their technology with the rest of the world, and we get different characters' points of view on that. So that's going to be a major thing going forward, as we get not just like, T'Challa's and his girlfriends and his generals. We get a lot of different aspects of like, is this the right thing to do? Is this not the right thing to do? Which plays in later on to the movie a little bit more significantly. They get intel about Klaus selling the vibranium weapon that he stole. And this is where it kind of makes sense, because it's like, if he had all that vibranium, why steal this? And it was just to get T'Challa to come out and have some kind of confrontation. At least I think that was the point. Otherwise, I don't know what was the point of it. Is that the sense you got? Oh.
Yeah, that is the sense I got.
Yeah. Then we got that. This is one of the worst parts of the movie. It's just like the scene is just a few seconds, but it caused a meme that I thought was incredibly annoying and stupid. It's where his little sister's like, "What are those? What are those?" That whole pointing to the sandals meme. I don't know.
Oh yeah. I wasn't even aware that was a meme. I hadn't seen that, but I remember the scene now.
Lucky you.
I'll see it all the time now, but
yeah, I don't know if it's still a thing, but a couple of years ago when the movie came out, it was a big thing. So, but this is kind of like a Q James Bond type situation where she's talking him through all these different weapons and things like that. I thought that was kind of interesting, like homage or tribute to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're right on. That's the thing that crossed my mind too. Just every I've watched a lot of James Bond movies actually in the last few weeks, so it's fresh in my mind, and there's a lot of similarities there. Yes.
Yeah, I grew up watching. It's funny, like as a kid, there wasn't anything like. Okay, I'll say it. There wasn't a lot of porn as a kid. So as a kid going through puberty, in our days, 80s, 90s, or whatever. And it was hard to see a lot of R-rated movies. So for me, seeing James Bond, even though those movies didn't show any nudity or anything, but the double entendres, the fact that there was this guy always getting laid, I kind of liked watching those movies just for that fact. It's like,
sure.
I wasn't necessarily into those movies, but it's funny, that we're talking about that subject. Did you see the trailer today that came out?
Oh, for the new Bond movie?
Yeah.
No, I did not. I wasn't aware it was dropping today, but no, I'm going to watch every single Bond movie this year. I've got about half of them done. I'll watch the other half in the next several weeks. So, because I want to see that new movie. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll probably watch them in time to catch a new movie. I think it's out November, but it looks good. I'm not a Bond fan, but this movie looks pretty good.
Good.
Yeah. So getting back on track, they get to his casino scene. It's kind of like a spy-ish espionage type vibe to this section of the film. We get the Stan Lee cameo. We meet the Everett character who was in Civil War. Andy Serkis. Now, I thought he was great as Gollum, even though I wasn't into the Lord of the Rings movies. I saw maybe I saw all three. I don't remember, but I'm familiar with his character from there. I don't know a lot of the acting he's done outside of Gollum, but I thought he was really good in this, and you could tell he was having a lot of fun playing this character.
Okay, that's enough.
I made it rain. Put some music on. What do you think this is, the funeral?
Yeah, he was really good. The other thing, I think I'm just like you. I saw the first two Lord of the Rings movies. I have not seen the third one yet, but he was also in two of the three new Star Wars movies that came out. He was Snoke was his character name. So, but yeah, no, I thought he was really good in this too. I like him.
Yeah, you could tell he was having a lot of fun being over the top in a lot of these scenes and stuff like that. There's a big fight scene. I'm not a big action guy, so the fight scene really didn't do a lot for me. It wasn't bad, but it's not something that really gets me going. The car chase scene, I wasn't a big fan of it. I think it was a little too cartoonish, especially the part where the car that the women are in, where his girlfriend and his general are in, it kind of gets destroyed. And then his girlfriend is still holding the steering wheel. And then the general is like surfing on the hood. And they explain the fact that T'Challa has powers. But as far as what we know, these women don't have powers. It's like, how can they do all this stuff? I don't know. It's just a little too over the top for me.
Again, it's you got to suspend disbelief with stuff like this many times. And just within the realm of a superhero movie, you can get away with it.
Yeah, you can, but if you're going to go through the trouble of saying, okay, T'Challa can only do this because he has these powers, it's like, give us some reason these women can do it. But you're right, they can get away with it in a superhero movie, I guess. But I just thought it was a little too cartoonish for my taste. Killmonger rescues Claw after he's captured. We get a little exposition where Everett kind of finds out, that, hey, maybe there is some truth to what Claw is saying about the fact that the vibranium he stole wasn't all the vibranium, and that there's a lot going on in Wakanda. And Nikita, his girlfriend, is shot at, but Everett saves her by taking the bullet for her, which then has T'Challa say, okay, we'll take him to Wakanda to save him. But in doing so, he also fails his mission. So he goes back failing, where he kind of made a promise to one of his generals, or his general's boyfriend, that he would come back with Claw dead, because Claw killed his parents and Claw killed a bunch of people when he came in and stole the vibranium. Killmonger kills Claw now to get into Wakanda, and it kind of establishes more of Killmonger's character in that there was very little hesitation once Claw held his girlfriend in front of him, that like, hey, he just, after she apologized for failing, he just killed his own girlfriend.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Eric.
It's gonna be okay.
Rather than potentially letting Claw escape, and then kills Claw because he knows that, listen, they want Claw dead or alive, and he's going to bring him in dead, and that's going to get him into Wakanda, where he's been trying to get into. Pretty cold-blooded guy. They went from Bonnie and Clyde to just Clyde real quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's brutal, yeah.
Forrest Whitaker plays the character, or the older version of one of the characters we saw in the first scene, where he was the second spy. And I didn't want to get into it there because we're going to talk about it again here. What are your thoughts on the fact that Forrest Whitaker was a spy spying on a spy, and he found out that the first spy was giving information to Claw to get into Wakanda to steal weapons, or to steal the vibranium? But if he's spying on him and he knows that, why not just say something before he actually goes through with it? Why say like, hey, I know he was going to do that after the fact, It's like, why wouldn't he say something beforehand?
Yeah, there's really no explanation for that, other than let's just gloss over that so we can keep the movie going. It's just one of those things. It's a little hole that you discovered there, but that maybe not a lot of people did. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for the movie's sake, him saying it in front of him was like, like, oh my gosh, like, you betrayed me. it's a good
Yeah.
moment for there, but in the context of like saving lives and saving stuff, if he knew what was going on, say it before it happened, you know. Anyway, this part just didn't make a lot of sense to me. We get a little bit more explanation on Killmonger's origin. His dad talked about Black people being overly policed, which is something we can't relate to 2 years later. That's not something that's happening in today's culture. So that's just purely in the comic book world. But his brother wasn't trying to hear any of that stuff, and so in anger, he tries to shoot Forrest Whitaker's character for betraying him, and that's when T'Challa's father, T'Chaka, kills his own brother to protect Forrest Whitaker.
Right.
And yeah, so we get a little bit more going on. And again, a lot of this is making you sympathize a little bit more with the Killmonger character, even though he's not necessarily the greatest guy in the world. So Killmonger uses Claw's body to talk his way into getting into Wakanda. And once he's in there, he has another pretty good speech in a scene with, I guess there's like a council meeting, and he talks his way into the challenge fight with T'Challa, in which he not only beats T'Challa, but then also kills Forrest Whitaker's character. What are your thoughts on all that stuff that happened at this point?
Honestly, I really enjoyed that scene. I'm not a big fight fan either. I'm not a big action fan, but I really enjoyed the scenery. I enjoyed that whole aspect, tossing him off the side. And it was, again, well, we're going to find out later on, he never did quit. He never did yield, as he said. So it could keep going. And I thought that was quite a dramatic scene, actually. Like you said, there was that little plot hole back there, but that made for a nice dramatic scene there, too, with Forrest Whitaker saying, blame me, take me. Yeah, and it was also brutal, too.
Yeah. This was I think the only real blood in the movie, unless I missed something. They pretty much kept it bloodless aside from this.
Yeah, I was going to say there was somebody's throat got sliced at some point in this movie too, and I was looking actually to see if there was a little blood there. I didn't see a drop.
There was not
Nope.
a drop. No.
Yep.
This was the only blood in the movie. Who knows? I don't know the politics of this stuff. Maybe for a PG-13 movie, I know you can only use a certain amount of curse words. Maybe there's a certain amount of blood you can use, and it's like, all right, like we'll just use the blood in this scene, or I don't know, but whatever it is, they picked a good scene to use it because it was one of the more dramatic fight scenes. So, and yeah, it's pretty improbable that he would survive that fall, but it's a pretty deep fall, man. Water doesn't stay soft.
No,
You're
it's
falling
like
from
glass.
It's
You fall about 100 and 110 feet or so, they say, is about the furthest you can go and possibly survive. I think this was much higher than that.
Yeah, it looked significantly higher. And the fall didn't look too good either, though. It looked a little like fake. You could tell it was green screened, which is an issue that comes up later with some of these fight scenes, in that they don't look great. And I kind of heard, I think at the time, that they try to rush it out and they didn't get the effects as developed as they wanted, which would make sense because some of the CGI towards the end looks a little wonky. And this was kind of the first sign of, like, for a big budget movie, that fall could have looked a little bit better to me. But not the biggest deal in the world at this point. Killmonger gets the Black Panther powers. He has a visit with his father. I thought it was a good scene. It could have been a little bit longer because this was the only time we see him interact with his father. And I don't have any kids, but a lot of, you do see this in movies and you hear about it with families where it's like if there's a relationship that's broken with father and son, you do have this son kind of wanting to fulfill the father's mission or his dream, or like, it's like, if my dad played baseball, now I'm going to be this great baseball player, or things like that. And you kind of had that dynamic here where it's like his father wanted to do something for Black people and his son kind of took up that mantle. And here we get to see them together. And as much as they fleshed out his character pretty good for these type of movies, you don't see bad guys develop this well, except for like the Joker. he seems to get developed well in almost every incarnation except Suicide Squad. I thought the scene with him and his father could have been a little bit longer and more fleshed out, but I still thought it was pretty good.
You're right. It was pretty brief now that I think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't really say much to each other, but it was still good though.
I mean, that also could be, clearly this guy, he's the bad guy in this movie. Maybe, and you feel some sympathy for him at that point. Maybe they don't want us to feel overly sympathetic towards him. Who knows?
Yeah, but I thought like a way to achieve that and develop it more would have been for his father to say something in the fact like, "Don't go down this road I did," or "You're going too far." I thought this would have been a good time for that. And
yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly. Yeah.
so, and from there, there's like a little rebellion built up with his mother, his girlfriend, and the guy they saved and all that stuff. They're coming together, and the guy he defeated. So there's this like little ragtag squad coming together. I felt the first time I saw this movie, not now because obviously I know what happens. The second time I viewed it, the first time I saw it, I'm like, this would be a perfect point to say, okay, he's dead, he's gone. Period. Have the sister take the flower, have her become the new Black Panther, and have this be like this team movie now, where you have all these other side characters form a team, and together they'll defeat the main bad guy. I don't know if you watch a lot of the Shaw Brothers movies, but this is kind of like how a Shaw Brother movie would play out. The main good guy is maybe a little too arrogant. I saw this one where like the main good guy didn't want to take advice from his wife, who knew a certain style of kung fu, to blend it with his. He didn't. He died by the bad guy, and then the son grew up and learned from the mother, and then, or you'd have other ones where like the main good guy dies, but then the other side characters come together, and it's like together they defeat the bad guy. It's like, I'll grab his leg, you grab the other leg, I'll kick him in, stuff like that. I don't know how many of those movies you saw, but I thought this would have been a good point to say, okay, together they'll defeat him after T'Challa's died.
Yeah, no, that would have been a way to go, I think. But yeah, I'm kind of speechless on that one. But I think you're right.
Maybe I'm trying too hard there, but I just thought it would have been interesting to have one of these movies actually kill off the main character. I thought that would have been an interesting point, but maybe I'm putting too much thought into it.
Yeah, I mean, knowing now that there's not going to be another one, maybe they could have. Who knows?
Yeah, but so from there, he takes the flower, he gets revived, and he goes back in with his ragtag group. This is another interesting point. I want your thoughts on this. This is kind of like, it's kind of, the first time I saw it, I thought this is stupid because Wakanda is this big civilized society that's supposed to be more advanced than us, more intelligent than us. All right, let's forget about the barbaric way they choose their king. Aside from that, they're way more advanced than us and they're way smarter than us, right? So why is it now that they have their king back that now they're all fighting each other? There are no external bad guys. This is Wakandans against Wakandans.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that divides them is this new guy that came in and beat your king in a fight. And now you're all going to be like killing each other over this. That's what I thought the first time I saw it. And I was like, this didn't make any sense to me. But then on rewatching it, I put it in the context of the real world. And if you have a room full of people and they're doing something together, let's say it's a job or it's a sports team or it's whatever, where they're all working together, they can have no issues. But then if you bring up like politics and religion, you can divide that room real quickly. And if people have like a strong stance on like abortion or a strong stance on police brutality or whatever it is, that room can get divided and heated real quickly. And putting it in that context, it made more sense to me. What are your thoughts on?
Yeah, as I see all these guys fighting, the first thing that came to mind was civil war. We have a civil war here, which you're not really expecting when you're seeing all these this advanced society. But they're warriors. That seems to be their culture also. But no, you are right, because you got to think in terms of where this kingdom is right now. They just got a new ruler who was vastly different from the old ruler, and clearly there's some divide there because there are some people who are supporting this guy. So it's a powder keg, especially when the other guy, the older guy, suddenly returns, and then yeah, it's very easy to see how that could happen. I hope it doesn't happen in our own world right now, but you could see some things like that starting to happen.
Yeah, but it's just weird. In the context of the movie, this was maybe like one day. It's like a guy comes in, one day later, all of you guys are like killing each other. This isn't like some outside army came in here like in the third Avengers movie. Where it's just like, all right, like everybody's trying to get into Wakanda to kill you guys, and you're trying to hold them out of the bubble. Avengers Endgame, I think it was, or whatever the Infinity War, whatever the second to last one was,
Okay.
where they're trying to get into Wakanda. But yeah, from there, again, we get into the final battle. I'm not a huge fan of these long battle scenes. Even the best long battle scene will lose me because once you get away from the characters and it's just like 10, 15 minutes of straight fighting, I just zone out. But I'm not a big fan of the CGI here. The CGI Rhino didn't do it for me. And the whole train sequence, they look like cartoon characters when they were in their costumes, how wonky the CGI looked. So I wasn't a huge fan of the fighting going on. You mentioned there's one of the Wakandan warrior women that gets her throat sliced and not a single drop of blood. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part is her body rolled towards the front of the camera and you saw her throat closer to the screen. I was like, why use that shot if you're not going to use any blood? It's like have her fall away from the camera, But yeah, Killmonger, obviously, the bad guy loses at the end. Again, it's kind of like I've seen this scene in like cartoons and maybe some B movies. The weapon gets flipped up in the air. The good guy grabs it, stabs him. Nothing new here. But I did think the final speech was maybe the best scene in the movie.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships. Because they knew death was better than bondage.
It's kind of depressing as well because it's what really happened. You have these people taken from Africa and, they'd rather jump off the ship than spend the rest of their lives as slaves. And, reading about what happened to some of these people once they got to America, it's like, yeah, maybe they were better off just dying instead of living the way they did,
Right. No, I agree with you. That was a great speech. It was a great ending. It was almost almost like he came full circle a little bit. He's the bad guy in this movie, but he has some valid points. So
yeah. And I think they handle his character pretty well, aside from the nitpicks I mentioned, because you sympathize with him, but you also realize that he's too far gone, that there's too much anger built up in him and there's too much hate built up in him for him to ever be on the good side or be anything other than the single-minded view that he has. There's no changing him, which makes you think, all right, yeah, it's better off,
Yeah, it reminded me of the end of Return of the Jedi. It's Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of good at the very, very end, but he can't live. He's got to go.
Yeah, he's done too much already. Like you can't forgive all the stuff he's done. I thought this was interesting. I did read up on Chadwick Boseman, and he kind of agrees with a lot of the people that kind of view like Killmonger not being that bad. He goes even to a further extreme, and he says that T'Challa is the villain in this movie. It's like T'Challa was born with a silver vibranium spoon in his mouth. I think that was the quote I read. And the article gets into a little bit more detail, but essentially he's saying that, listen, T'Challa grew up privileged, and he can't really kind of relate to Killmonger, and he kind of views him as the bad guy in this film. And I think people are kind of split, people can probably see it maybe the way I do, and other people kind of say, no, Killmonger is definitely the hero. I don't think anyone kind of fully views it black and white. I think everyone has it various shades of gray.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, Killmonger had some valid points, and I think it's almost like at the end of the movie he came full circle as well, because obviously we know he's going to open up a little bit, and they're going to share some of their technology and such with the world. So maybe that whole situation obviously changed him to a point that, okay, maybe we should do something, maybe we should have some changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And
it's
then,
redemption for both of them, perhaps.
yeah, that's the way they try to play it out at the end, because after T'Challa comes back with the final flower after he's thrown off the waterfall, he does visit the spirit world, and he does reject his father and his ancestors. He said they were wrong for what they did. So they both, went through a lot of, well, he went through a lot of change, at least. I don't necessarily think Killmonger changed, but we just learned more about his motivations as the movie went along. But yeah, I definitely liked it a lot better than the first time I saw it. I was kind of dismissive because I just focused on the action and stuff like that. Now, knowing that Boseman died, I kind of more focused on his scenes and more of the acting scenes, and I kind of zoned out with the action stuff. And when you focus on that stuff, it's a pretty interesting story, pretty good, interesting characters with both of them. Killmonger's a little bit more interesting, but I thought T'Challa was interesting as well. Because, like I said, Killmonger was an interesting character from beginning to end, and he was more mysterious, and you learn more about him. But T'Challa did grow as a character as well. So, and then you have, of course, the Iron Man ending, where it ends just before he says, "I'm Black Panther," when the kid actually is. So, but yeah, overall, definitely a thumbs up. I'm assuming the same from you as well, right?
Yeah, again, like I said, I enjoyed it much more this time than I did the first time. And I did like it the first time, but it's not one of those movies like, oh, I got to see this again and again and again. But now I'm kind of feeling like I do want to watch it a few more times.